The whole town told him those winter woods were cursed, but Walter Hayes didn't listen, and now he knows why. A broke 68-year-old veteran moved to the snowy hills outside Bozeman, Montana, hoping for a quiet place to heal. But when his loyal German shepherds started growling at a strip of frozen earth in a ravine, they uncovered a buried armored truck packed with bones, stolen money, and a secret a powerful man thought would stay hidden forever. What they found didn't just expose a crime, it ripped the mask off an entire town. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. Winter's breath howled through the pines, coating Montana's Gallatin Valley in icy stillness. Walter Hayes, a 68-year-old veteran with a long, raw history stitched into the corners of his tired eyes, moved carefully along the narrow winter trail. Snow squeaked under his worn boots, each step a reminder of old injuries earned during days he rarely spoke of anymore. He had a tall frame, but his posture slouched slightly, from decades bearing burdens heavier than any rucksack. His silver hair was trimmed to a stubborn military cut, and a neatly kept beard framed a jaw set in quiet defiance, as if the world still expected him to salute. He wore a thick, olive-green parka that had seen more winters than most people would believe. It was the only gift he kept from his service days, the only thing that still felt like protection. Beside him, Ranger, his 8-year-old German shepherd, trotted confidently ahead. Ranger was a magnificent animal, with black and tan fur, thick enough to withstand the fierceness of Montana's wind. His amber eyes were alert, intelligent, always searching. Ranger was no ordinary pet. He had once been Walter's K-9 partner during high-risk missions overseas. Training, discipline, and loyalty were ingrained in every line of muscle beneath his winter coat. But beyond duty, Ranger had become Walter's anchor, the one constant presence that silenced the echoes of explosions and the cries of those he couldn't save. Walter inhaled the crisp air deeply, a breath that reminded him he was alive despite many moments when that outcome had seemed uncertain. Life after retirement had led him to Bozeman for a reason he never clearly defined, only understood: peace. He believed that the mountains, the snow, and the silence could help him quiet the battlefield that still roared inside his skull. But even here, miles away from any war, his mind was restless. Nights were the worst. Sometimes he woke up choking, believing dirt and smoke filled his lungs. Other times he just lay awake, staring at the canvas of his tent ceiling, listening to Ranger breathe proof that he wasn't alone, drifting through darkness. The wind whipped harder, and Walter muttered to no one, "If I break a hip out here, boy, it's your fault." His voice was gruff, but softened by the affection hidden beneath. Then, without warning, Ranger froze. The dog's muscles stiffened, tail straight, ears pointed sharply forward. A low growl vibrated in his chest, a primal warning. Walter felt the hairs on his own neck twitch as he stepped closer. Ranger looked backward at him, and in those intelligent eyes, Walter read, "Something is wrong." "What is it?" Walter whispered, already scanning the terrain. Years of training conditioned him to match danger's breathing pattern. He followed Ranger as the dog pulled him toward a steep ravine, a narrow cut, where a seasonal stream once flowed before winter sealed everything in ice. The descent wasn't easy. Walter grunted as pain shot through his knees. Old bullet fragments, old jumps from helicopters, old consequences he lived with. Ranger guided him to a place where the frozen earth had been eroded by recent floods. There, partly exposed beneath the snow and tangled roots, lay a metallic object. It wasn't small. At least 3 feet long, just in the visible portion, the metal was thick, industrial, and covered with heavy rust. The color wasn't the typical orange of abandoned farm equipment. This was darker, denser, like something built to endure gunfire, not soil and time. Walter brushed his glove over the frosty surface. Hard. cold, solid. He found the faint edge of a welded seam perfectly straight, his brows furrowed. "This isn't junk," he murmured. His heart thumped a little harder. Ranger gave a deeper growl and stepped back. Hackles raised. The reaction wasn't fear. It was disgust. Walter had seen that kind of instinct from the dog only once, when they uncovered a hidden weapons cache overseas, and once when they found something far worse, a bunker full of bodies civilians never learned existed. Suddenly the stillness of the Gallatin forest felt too still, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, listening. A shiver crawled down Walter's spine, not from the cold. He bent closer, scraping away more snow with his gloves, until his fingers stung. The outline became clearer, the curved edge of a thick door, a heavy latch, steel plating. What the hell was a reinforced structure, almost certainly military or armored, doing buried in a Montana forest? The wind roared, blinding him with freshly blown snow. Ranger nudged him urgently, almost demanding they leave. All right, Walter said, standing up slowly. His bones protested with crackling arguments. If there's treasure, great. If it's ghosts, I'm retiring again. He reached into a pocket and pulled out a few smooth stones, stacking them into a small tower. To mark the location, an old ranger trick he picked up during search and rescue volunteer work. It looked humble, but the meaning was clear: I will come back. The journey back to camp was quiet, aside from the wind's relentless song. Ranger kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning the path behind them, as if expecting the metal to rise from the ravine and follow. For Walter, the silence was louder than before. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Could it be a forgotten Cold War relic? A crashed vehicle or something the government wanted gone? He had encountered too many secrets in his lifetime to assume anything was innocent when it tried this hard to stay hidden. When they finally reached their campsite near the timberline, Walter poured food into Ranger's bowl, but barely noticed the clinking sound of kibble. He sat on a fallen log, staring into the pine-darkened horizon. Ranger sat beside him, head leaning against his leg, sensing his unease. Some things, Walter whispered, are buried for a reason. His breath drifted like smoke into the cold air. But buried things have a bad habit of calling out to those who know how to find them. And Walter, whether he liked it or not, had always been a man who found the hidden truths, especially the ones that didn't want to be found. Tonight the forest seemed to whisper an invitation he could not ignore. The question pressing hardest in his chest wasn't what he had discovered, but why him? Why now? Just as he was finally learning how to live without a rifle in his hands. He reached down, scratching between Ranger's ears. The dog leaned in a warm reassurance. Tomorrow, Walter said, voice firming with resolve he thought he had buried along with the wars of his past. We dig. Whether it would bring peace or hell rising, neither of them could know. But winter had just delivered them a secret wrapped in steel, and secrets never stay quiet for long. Morning fog clung to the valley like a shroud, as if Montana itself wished to hide what lay beneath its frozen skin. Walter Hayes woke before dawn, shoulders stiff, yet a restless determination pulled him upright. The night had been long and filled with flashes, steel slamming shut, boots running through dust, men shouting his name across continents he no longer remembered fondly. Ranger, sprawled near the tent flap, raised his head as soon as Walter stirred. The dog's ears stood high, always alert, before Walter even managed to blink the sleep from his eyes. Loyalty had taught Ranger to be awake to danger long before Walter felt it. Walter didn't need coffee to know what he had to do. His mind replayed the sight of the metal surface buried in ice, its unnatural shape, its weight. His gut, trained over years of war, screamed that he hadn't found trash. He had uncovered something the earth had tried to digest and failed. With a grunt, he loaded his gear into his dented dark green Ford pickup, an old model that rattled more than it purred, but reliable enough to carry a stubborn man and his dog back into trouble. He tossed a crowbar, a military entrenching tool, a foldable steel shovel he had carried from desert to desert, and a heavy-duty flashlight into the truck bed. Ranger hopped in without hesitation. The drive back into Gallatin National Forest was quiet, except for the sound of chains clinking against the tires as they gripped the frozen trail. Walter's breath fogged the air inside the cab, while Ranger sat upright with stiff posture, scanning every snow-covered shadow ahead. Something in the dog's stance made Walter's heartbeat thud a little harder than usual. Ranger was calm but ready. Reaching the ravine, Walter stepped out and felt the immediate bite of wind against his cheeks. He descended carefully, gripping roots and rocks slick with frost. Ranger followed, more graceful on four paws than Walter could ever be with his aging knees. Together they stood before the exposed steel. The mound of snow and earth surrounding it resembled a sarcophagus refusing to stay buried. Walter set to work thrusting the shovel into ice-hardened soil. Each strike sent vibration up through his arms, rattling old pain awake in his joints. Hours slipped by. Walter's breath came harsh, forming small clouds that burst into the cold. Ranger paced along the ravine rim like a sentry, occasionally letting out a low growl at the empty forest, as though warning unseen eyes to keep their distance. Walter had worked through harder conditions before, but something about the silence here, too complete, too intentional, made this feel like a battlefield without gunfire. Finally, the last of the tangled roots holding the metal captive snapped apart. Walter knelt, brushing away debris to reveal a massive, reinforced hinge. One more push. He jammed the crowbar into the groove and shoved with every ounce of stubbornness that 6 decades of survival had left him. Rust screamed as the door shifted, and then with a sharp metallic shriek it gave way. The air that escaped was not the scent of air at all. Time, rot, and sealed death rushed past him, hitting him in the face like a physical blow. His stomach twisted with a raw urge to retreat, but he steadied himself as Ranger growled, ears, flattened tail tucked down. The dog who once charged into smoke-filled rooms without hesitation now wanted out. That alone told Walter this was bad. He switched on the flashlight. The beam carved through darkness to reveal a grotesque tableau, 2 skeletons slumped in the front of what was unmistakably the cabin of an armored truck. Torn and mold-eaten scraps of uniforms clung stubbornly to the bones, bearing the faint insignia of a private security company. A shotgun lay near the back, rusted useless now. Brass casings littered the steel floor like grim confetti, and the safe bolted into the center of the vehicle had been pried open violently long ago. The money was gone, or so whoever killed these men had believed. "This isn't just an accident," Walter muttered, voice hoarse. "This is a goddamn burial." Ranger pressed against his side, refusing to step further inside the steel tomb. Instead, he pawed insistently at a small space beneath the driver's seat. Walter crouched, shining his flashlight into the dark gap. Something metallic glinted faintly. Using his pocket knife, he gently worked the object free, a silver Zippo lighter. Its surface was tarnished with decades of grime, but the engraved initials were still crystal clear. RC. Walter held it, as though it might burn him. The weight of those initials was heavier than the metal. Men didn't personalize something unless they wanted to keep it close. Somewhere out in Montana, someone had lost or left behind proof, and Walter had just picked it up. He backed out of the vehicle, covering his nose from the smell that clung to his memory, like a stain, then used fallen branches and clumps of snow to camouflage the entrance. The last thing he needed was to draw the wrong eyes before he knew what he was dealing with. By noon, Walter and Ranger were driving toward town. Bozeman was modest brick storefronts, snow-covered roofs, a main street where time moved slow. But secrets often hid best in places where no one imagined danger. Walter parked outside the city library, a small building with a slanted roof and a faded sign. Inside, warmth and the scent of paper greeted him. Behind the counter sat Linda Parker, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back in a tidy bun. She wore an oversized cardigan of deep burgundy, and her gentle smile carried the kindness of someone who had helped more lost souls than she could count, just by pointing toward the right book. But her eyes, light gray, held intelligence sharp enough to slice through pretense. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked, hands folded patiently. Walter forced a friendly expression, adjusting into a role he didn't love, the harmless old man seeking history. "Just doing a little research on old cases, local stories. Something involving security trucks, maybe 1980s. Linda paused for only a fraction of a second, enough for Walter to notice. Her gaze sharpened with recognition, but she said nothing more than, "Microfilm is in the back. I'll show you." With her help, Walter dug through years of archived newspapers. Headlines spun by beneath the flickering projector light. Then there it was, armored truck vanishes near Bozeman, $5 million missing. 2 guards named. Search failed, investigation halted. Coverage mysteriously faded within weeks. Not even a whispered rumor in the decades since. Either the trail had gone cold too fast or someone with power tossed a blanket over the truth. The question burning in Walter's thoughts. Why had no one ever found the truck? Ranger bumped his leg just as Walter stepped into Bozeman Diner, his stomach craving coffee after too much cold and too many ghosts. The diner was an old-fashioned place, checkered floors, red vinyl booths, and a menu board from a long-gone era. From behind the counter emerged Stan, a burly man in his 50s, graying mustache thick above a tight-lipped mouth. His shoulders were broad, his posture rigid, the stance of someone who'd worked hard every day of his life and trusted very few people. His voice rumbled low when he spoke, "Coffee pie." Walter nodded. Both would save an old man's life. Stan poured the coffee like he was measuring out trust. Walter tried his charm. "Hey, you ever hear about that missing truck case? 1989 must have been huge news around here." The diner's hum died instantly. Conversations choked. Eyes shifted away. Even the television seemed to quiet. Stan set the mug down with a thud hard enough to slosh coffee over the rim. His jaw tightened. "We don't talk about that," he said, voice flat as winter ice. "Let it stay buried." Walter said nothing more. The silence had told him enough. Hours later at camp, that silence became a threat. Ranger's growl hit first deep, alarming. Walter reached for his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the clearing. There it was, a hunting knife stabbed into his table, its deer antler handle still trembling from force. Footprints in the snow, large boots, 2 sets circled the camp. The message needed no signature. "We know you were there. Leave it." Walter stared at the knife fist tightening. Ranger moved closer, leaning against his leg as if to anchor him again. He sighed, rubbing his dog's fur with a hand that no longer trembled. "Looks like peace isn't ready for us yet, boy." He'd seen warnings before. In war, you ignored them and died. In life, he wasn't sure the rules were any different, but someone had picked the wrong old man to scare off. Tomorrow, he would return, not just to dig, but to uncover the truth someone was desperate to keep buried. Night never truly leaves the Montana winter. It only loosens its grip a little when the sun forces a reluctant glow over the frozen mountains. Walter Hayes woke with the dull ache of a man who had spent his life working harder than his body ever wanted. His sleep had been shallow, haunted by the sight of the armored tomb hidden beneath the snow. Ranger, lying curled close to the tent opening, lifted his head even before Walter moved, sensing the decision already forming in his partner's mind. It was time to go back. Walter packed, not like an explorer, but like a man who had survived too many ambushes to be careless. He threw essentials into his small tactical pack, a rugged digital camera wrapped in a wool scarf, a first aid kit with faded labels, bottled water, and a field knife with a worn-out handle. Ranger's leash hung useless. Walter had learned long ago that nothing and no one led Ranger. The dog followed by loyalty alone. The morning wind nipped sharply at their exposed skin and fur as they descended once again into the ravine that now felt tainted by history. Walter's movements had a different rhythm than yesterday. Fewer pauses, more caution, every footstep measured. He had spent years stepping into unknown rooms, not knowing which corner held a rifle's barrel. That instinct hummed again now. Ranger posted himself near the entrance of the armored vehicle, his stance protective, his ears turning like small radar dishes tracking invisible threats. Inside the steel coffin, Walter focused on evidence. He took photographs, meticulous, purposeful. The camera clicked sharply in the silence, capturing every grotesque detail. The uniforms decayed but still recognizable. The scatter of shell casings. The safe cracked open with brutal impatience. Each flash illuminated the truth: someone had killed these two men, not just for money, but to ensure silence. Walter had encountered too much darkness to believe in coincidence. He tapped on the truck's floor and walls sound mapping as he listened for something that didn't belong, a trick his bomb squad training had taught him. His knuckles paused on one spot beneath the driver's seat, where the metal gave a duller, hollow reply. Sweat stung his eyes despite the cold as he scraped away grime. Beneath years of rust, his fingers traced a rectangle, subtle, carefully engineered. With gritted teeth, he wedged the crowbar in and leveraged his full weight. Age might have slowed him, but stubbornness still made him strong. The metal groaned and finally lifted, revealing a hidden compartment lined with heavy-duty tarp, stiffened by time. The truth beneath was staggering, stacked bundles wrapped in aging plastic, dusted with mold but intact. He peeled a corner open. Crisp $100 bills unmarred by decades of concealment. Perhaps $2 million, 2 million reasons to kill and bury the truck deep enough to erase its existence. The world narrowed into the flick of the camera as he captured evidence. But the familiar low-building growl of Ranger shattered the calm. Walter's spine locked. Ranger only behaved that way when danger was not a possibility, but a certainty. Then came the sound, a rumble of engines cutting through the trees, different from the gentle moan of wind. Not gentle at all. Aggressive. Multiple vehicles. Walter shoved the panel back into place, scattering dirt and rust until it looked untouched. He whispered only one word: run. They scrambled up the ravine just as the first dark SUV skidded to a stop at the tree line. Snow exploded beneath its tires. Two men stepped out, large, heavily built faces, hard, like men who didn't hesitate to break bones. Both wore tactical winter jackets, rifles slung ready. The second SUV parked behind it. From the back seat stepped a man in his early 70s, but with the confidence of someone who commanded rooms and armies through fear alone. His hair was expertly groomed silver, his tailored black coat immaculate despite the dirt road. His eyes sharp blue and ice cold. Richard Coleman. Walter recognized him immediately, not from personal acquaintance, but from local news articles he had skimmed at the diner. Bozeman Construction's Golden King, a man who built half the town and owned the loyalty of the other half. His voice cut through the cold like a polished blade. "Fan out," he ordered. Not loud, but absolute. Walter didn't wait. He and Ranger darted into the trees. A gunshot cracked splintering bark near his head. Snow erupted in violent bursts as more shots followed. Walter's breath puffed in frantic clouds as he zigzagged, letting instinct not thought guide him. Ranger moved effortlessly, muscles rippling beneath his coat, leading Walter through underbrush. Their pursuers crashed clumsily through. Adrenaline masked the pain in Walter's knees as they barreled downhill. Fear whispered at him, but there wasn't time to listen. "Think, don't panic," he muttered. He grabbed a river stone from the ground and hurled it left into a bramble patch. The stone crashed loudly, snagging their pursuers' attention. One of the gunmen shouted, "He's heading that way." Walter held his breath as boots stamped toward the false trail. Ranger slipped away into the side shadows, a phantom streak. A yelp of shock followed. Ranger had launched himself onto a man's leg, jaws clamping down hard. The rifle clattered onto the snow before Ranger released and vanished again. "Damn dog," the man screamed, voice spiraling into panic. Walter grabbed that priceless moment. He and Ranger veered into a narrow crevice hidden beneath a rock shelf. The entrance dropped into darkness, a shallow cave Walter had once marked for shelter. They slid into the cold, hollow hearts hammering. Ranger pressed his body low, listening. Silence swallowed them. Breath by breath, gunshots faded. Minutes or hours passed. Time blurred in the dark. Walter finally allowed himself to breathe fully. He checked Ranger carefully, only a minor scrape. His own hands trembled slightly, but Ranger nudged his palm, steadying him. "We need to know who we're fighting," Walter whispered, pulling his waterproof tablet from his pack. A small satellite modem blinked green, signal locked. From the safety of a rock chamber, he chased answers. Articles, archives, government records, every digital breadcrumb he could track. Coleman appeared everywhere once, a deputy sheriff assigned to the armored truck case, then suddenly retired, then miraculously a real estate mogul. Land deals, construction contracts, campaign fundraisers, money poured in from nowhere. The Zippo lighter's initials felt like a warning yesterday. Now they burned like a confession in his pocket. Coleman hadn't just helped bury the truck. He had buried the truth. Walter stared at his reflection, faintly visible in the tablet's dark frame. The man staring back wasn't just an old veteran anymore. He was the only witness alive who knew where the bodies were literally. And someone powerful enough to erase history was now hunting him in a forest that concealed screams too well. Ranger shifted and rested his head on Walter's knee, steady and warm. Walter exhaled slowly, fear cooling into resolve. "They killed 2 good men to keep what's under that snow," he murmured. "I won't let them do it again." Ranger's soft growl said he understood. The storm had started, and Walter Hayes' old bones, old nightmares, and all was not about to run from war. Not this time. Because the truth was his to dig up, and someone else's to bury. Darkness had settled heavily over the Montana woods, thicker than any cloud cover. Snowflakes drifted lazily like the world above had no idea what kind of violence was ready to unfold beneath its peaceful veil. Inside the cold cave they had used as refuge, Walter Hayes sat with his back against the stone wall, the glow of his waterproof tablet casting faint light over his weathered face. Ranger lay with his head on Walter's boot, eyes always open toward the entrance, as if sleep was a luxury neither of them could afford. Mark Jensen was a decade younger than Walter, late 50s, with a frame still sharp from FBI fieldwork, though now his gray stubble and tired hazel eyes betrayed years spent battling bureaucracy rather than bullets. Mark had been a military investigator. When he and Walter served together, sharp mind, sharper instincts. Life had not softened him, but had added layers of caution. When Mark's voice reached Walter through the encrypted audio call, there was both surprise and dread tangled in it. "Jesus, Walt, this is bigger than you realize. If you're right, if Coleman was behind that heist, the Bureau should have nailed him years ago." "We both know why that didn't happen," Walter replied quietly, glancing at Ranger, who let out a small, worried huff. "People with money write their own endings." Mark's pause said everything. Power had always been able to bury truth literally in this case. I'll escalate this, Mark promised. It's federal armored transport theft, interstate laundering homicide. But procedures take time. You'll need to keep your head down. Give me 48 hours. 48 hours, Walter repeated with a bitter laugh. Mark, they shot at me today. I'll get help moving, Mark insisted. Don't do anything reckless until I call. But Walter's gaze had already drifted toward the ravine, toward the buried proof that could put Coleman away forever. Waiting quietly had never been his talent. He ended the call and shut off the tablet. His decision had already crystallized. He needed Coleman desperate enough to expose himself. That was when he found Montana Truth, a small independent investigative blog run by anonymous journalists and activists unafraid to poke at the town's hidden injustices. If there was a trigger that could drag a powerful man into the open, it was public humiliation. Walter's fingers typed slowly, but his heart hammered fast. He attached a clear photo of the engraved silver Zippo, RC shining under the flashlight's beam. And he wrote only 2 sentences. Ask the richest man in Bozeman what he dropped in the woods in 1989. Secrets don't stay frozen forever. Send, delete, gone. Walter knew Coleman would see it within hours. And a man like Coleman, who had built his kingdom on lies, would rush to erase the proof himself. By nightfall, Walter and Ranger were back at the ravine. The moon hung like a cold witness, casting silver light across the snow. Walter's breath steamed in the air as he worked quickly, turning the area into a trap. He strung fishing line transparent and low between trees, each strand connected to tin cans filled with rocks and soil. One touch would send a metallic cry through the forest. Primitive, yes, but Walter trusted simple things more than technology. His perch was a rocky ledge 12 feet above the ravine edge, high ground, concealed by brush with a direct view of the truck's buried door. Ranger lay beside him, tense tail frozen. The dog's presence wasn't just comfort, it was survival. The forest wind whistled through the pines like a warning. The sound of engines came just past 11 p.m. Walter whispered showtime. 2 black SUVs cloaked in darkness rolled to a stop. Rigid silhouettes emerged. Coleman stepped down, last shoes crunching through the snow like punctuation to his arrogance. Richard Coleman's appearance was controlled. Intimidation, thick wool coat, tailored perfectly to a tall and deceptively strong frame. Silver hair slicked back without a strand daring to rebel. A face carved from stone and ambition. Beneath his veneer of wealth, a wolf sharpened its fangs. His right hand stayed close to the inside of his coat, where Walter knew a weapon waited. His 2 armed enforcers fanned out like hunting dogs, one visibly limping with a bandaged calf thanks to Ranger's bite earlier. The metallic tink-tink of the warning cans echoed as one guard snagged the tripwire. Coleman's reaction was immediate, gun-drawn eyes scanning. From the ledge, Walter let his voice roll down smooth as ice. Lose something in the snow. Coleman. Coleman's head snapped upward, fury twisting his face. He fired blindly into the ridge muzzle flashes, lighting the dark. Bullets ricocheted off stone in angry sparks. Ranger snarled, ready to leap if Walter signaled. Walter didn't fire back. He just waited. Let fear settle into their bones. Let adrenaline cloud their judgment. The enforcers stumbled deeper into the ravine, searching upward, while Walter and Ranger drifted silently along the ridge. With a whistle so soft, only Ranger heard the dog shot forward like a ghost launching down onto the uninjured guard. His jaws locked around the man's wrist gun, falling into the snow as the guard screamed. The limping enforcer spun to help, but Walter emerged from darkness, moving with surprising speed for his age. A swift elbow to the skull, precision born from years of battlefield muscle memory, and the limp man collapsed into the snow. Now only Coleman remained, the Emperor without his guard. He pointed the gun at Walter, but the barrel shook. His confidence, so polished in boardrooms and city council meetings, cracked under the cold judgment of the truth. Walter stepped into full moonlight, no weapon in hand. Ranger stood at his side, teeth bared. "You buried more than money," Walter said quietly. "You buried two men who never came home to their families." Coleman's breathing grew ragged. The wind swallowed his attempts to speak until he finally broke into frantic confession. His words spilled out in patches, fear struggling against ego, as he admitted to orchestrating the hijacking of the armored truck 28 years ago, shooting the guards himself after a disagreement, hiding the bodies and money in the ravine, and faking retirement while laundering millions into real estate projects that now defined Bozeman's skyline. Walter didn't bother recording him on his phone because headlights flashed through the trees, sirens whispering on the cold wind. Mark Jensen had kept his promise. FBI agents and local deputies stormed the scene. Coleman's gun dropped to the snow. His face twisted into something pitiful, stripped of the empire he had built with blood. His cuffs clicked into place. As Mark approached his jacket dusted with snow, he gave Walter a look that was part relief, part reprimand. "Reckless as always," he muttered. "You're lucky you didn't die out here." Walter chuckled softly. "Last time I checked, lucky or not, I'm still breathing." He reached down to pet Ranger, who finally relaxed his shoulders and wagged his tail faintly. "And he's still got all his teeth." Mark shook his head, but a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Still, as the flashing lights began escorting the criminals away, Walter's heart didn't celebrate. His victories were never clean. Behind every truth uncovered lay scars old and new. The weight of the Zippo in his pocket reminded him that justice didn't erase ghosts. It just gave them a gravestone. Tonight, though, he had stopped a monster clawing out of the snow. Tonight, righteousness had teeth, and it barked. Morning crawled over the Gallatin Valley like a cautious traveler, pale sunlight brushing over snow-capped ridges' rooftops, and the thin columns of chimney smoke rising into the crystal winter air. Beneath that calm surface lay the remnants of a night filled with flashing sirens, raised guns, and unraveling lies. The ravine only hours ago, a dark tomb of death and secrets, was now a bustling crime scene slowly emptying out as the final vehicles pulled away, taking with them the men who had built their fortunes on bones buried beneath the frost. Walter Hayes remained at the edge of the ravine a while longer, his breath curling in white clouds as he stared down at the armored truck being winched from the earth. The sight stirred conflicting emotions inside him, vindication, sorrow, and an exhaustion so deep it felt older than his bones. Ranger sat beside him, ears perked, watching the FBI's final cleanup with an alertness born from instinct. The dog's fur-black saddle pattern over a coat of rich sable ruffled slightly in the breeze, his amber eyes attentive to every metallic clank and human footstep. Someone approached, boots crunching through the snow with unhurried confidence. Special Agent Charles Roberts, the lead from the FBI's Montana office, stopped beside Walter. Roberts was a tall African-American man in his late 40s with sharp cheekbones, a close-cropped beard peppered with gray, and the kind of eyes that had seen too much but lost none of their resolve. His voice was deep, steady authority without arrogance. "You did a hell of a thing here, Mr. Hayes." Walter snorted a quiet laugh. "I've done a lot of things. Not all of them were hell of the good kind." Roberts glanced toward the truck, now suspended above ground, like a steel coffin caught between death and daylight. "Coleman's confession, the money you captured, the bodies, it's enough to make this airtight. Families have waited decades for truth. Today you handed it back to them." Walter shifted his weight, his old knee popping with a muted crack. He didn't like being called a hero. It felt like putting a bandage on a wound still bleeding underneath. "I just couldn't let those men stay forgotten," he said. "War teaches you a lot, Agent Roberts. Mostly how loud ghosts can scream if the living refuse to listen." Roberts nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. "You and your partner here," he said, lowering a hand toward Ranger. The German shepherd sniffed respectfully and accepted a gentle scratch behind his ear. A young crime scene technician called Roberts away. Before leaving, the agent handed Walter a business card, crisp and white against his mitten. "If you ever need anything, you call me. Veterans like you have done enough for this country. Let us handle the rest." Walter tucked the card away, feeling Ranger press against his leg, as if reminding him he wasn't alone in the fight. As law enforcement finally departed, leaving behind only tire tracks and trampled snow, silence wrapped around the ravine once more, no longer sinister, but relieved. Walter's legs were stiff, but his spirit felt strangely loose, lighter. For the first time in a long while, his heartbeat wasn't racing toward a battle. He drove back toward Bozeman, with Ranger curled contentedly in the passenger seat, head resting on Walter's faded winter coat. The old pickup rumbled like a warhorse ready for retirement, its heater sputtering warmth that barely kept pace with the cold leaking through ancient seals. In town, Bozeman Diner stood as it always had, red neon sign buzzing faintly, windows fogged from morning rush warmth. Walter hesitated before entering. Yesterday, he had walked into that place a stranger carrying a dangerous truth. Today, he was walking in as the man who forced that truth to the surface. Inside, a few regulars hunched over coffee, speaking softly. Stan, the middle-aged owner with the burly frame and graying mustache, froze behind the counter when he recognized Walter. His eyes flicked to Ranger and then to Walter's face, searching for anger or triumph. Walter took a stool and offered a faint, weary smile. "Just coffee and a slice of that pie again, Stan. The one you served yesterday wasn't half bad." Stan let out a breath he'd been holding and nodded. As he poured the coffee, his voice lowered. "Listen, people talk in small towns. Coleman owned half the buildings on this street. He paid folks' mortgages, funded the high school stadium. A lot of people owed him. Were afraid of him." His eyes softened. "Thank you for not being..." Walter didn't know how to respond. He wasn't looking for gratitude. But the sincerity in Stan's rough voice warmed a part of him the winter couldn't reach. When he and Ranger finally stepped back into the cold, the sun had climbed higher, pushing winter shadows aside inch by inch. The two headed to a rocky overlook outside the town, Walter's favorite spot to breathe, when memories clawed too hard. From that small cliff, the valley stretched out like a painting, pines dressed in snow, the faint charcoal silhouettes of the bridges, the distant hum of a moving world below. Ranger sat close, nudging Walter's hand until it rested on his fur. "So, what now?" Walter asked the air, though it was Ranger who answered with a subtle sideways look and a small, playful huff as if saying breakfast first, everything else after. Walter chuckled deep and unhurried. It was the laugh of a man who hadn't forgotten pain, but finally remembered joy. He thought about leaving town when this was done, driving south, chasing sun and warmth and the illusion of a new beginning. But something about Bozeman hooked into his heart. Maybe it was the way peace settled here. Maybe it was the chance to stop running from ghosts and start helping others find their way out of the dark. Later that week, he visited the Gallatin County Search and Rescue Office. The team was small but dedicated volunteers who scoured mountains and backwoods whenever someone went missing. They welcomed him without hesitation. They welcomed Ranger with even less. Dogs like him, loyal, trained, sharp-nosed, were worth more than a dozen flashlights in a blizzard. Walter filled out paperwork with hands that had once signed orders sending young men into danger. Now they signed forms promising to bring the lost back to their families. A different kind of service, one that healed instead of hurt. Bozeman would not remember the gunfire in the night. The papers would print Coleman's fall and call it justice. But the real story, the one only Walter and Ranger understood, was quieter. It was about the long road from trauma to peace, from survival to purpose. As winter deepened, the snow no longer felt like a suffocating blanket, but a clean slate. Ranger chased flakes, while Walter watched with a heart that finally allowed itself to feel warmth again. Heroes don't always wear medals. Some just wear heavy jackets and carry too many memories. Some walk with limping knees and a loyal dog at their side. Walter Hayes didn't save the world, but he saved a truth, and sometimes that is enough. In the quiet after everything, Walter finally understood something deeper than justice. Sometimes God works through ordinary people in ordinary moments to reveal extraordinary truth. What was buried in the snow for decades wasn't uncovered by chance. It was uncovered by purpose. A reminder that no matter how cold the world feels, God's light can still break through the frost and guide us toward what is right. And maybe that's the miracle we often overlook in our everyday lives. Not burning bushes, not parted seas, but a loyal dog tugging at frozen earth, a weary veteran brave enough to follow his conscience, and the quiet belief that truth will always find its way home. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what part stayed with you the most. Your words might lift someone else up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of courage, faith, and the hidden miracles God places in our path. May the Lord bless you, protect you, and guide you through every winter in your life. God bless you and everyone watching.